Hey everyone, before we get into this episode of The Overlook, I want to tell you about a brand new podcast that's all about Asheville, only each episode is under 5 minutes long. It's a daily radio-styled newscast called Wake Up Asheville. It's a morning podcast updating you on all the important local headlines. We check in with every credible local news source, then boil it all down to what you need to know in under 5 minutes. It's designed to tell you what you need to know and let you get on with your day. There's even a Spanish language version called Despierta Asheville. Wake Up Asheville and Despierta Asheville are both free and available every weekday morning wherever you get your podcasts.
I am a maker, a builder, a baker, although sometimes my messes are all that you'll find. I'll tell a story, both true and allegory. Oh, the process is precious, so it takes up all my time.
You're tuned to The Overlook with Matt Piken, a podcast about the news, arts, issues, and trends of Asheville, North Carolina. Today is the second half of a two-part conversation with founding members of a coalition called Reclaim Healthcare WNC. If you missed part one, stop right now, dial one click back in your podcasting app, and start there. My guests today are the same ones from part one: State Senator Julie Mayfield, retired physician Bruce Kelly, and Missy Harris, who recently left Mission Hospital after 5 years there as a chaplain. Their goal through Reclaim Healthcare WNC is pressuring HCA Healthcare to dramatically and demonstrably improve conditions for patients and staff at Asheville's Mission Hospital, or optimally, sell Mission back into the ownership and management of a nonprofit.
There hasn't been any kind of coordinated effort to hold their feet to the fire. And our coalition is working on a number of levels to bring that pressure to bear. The way that we think about it is there is not one thing that is going to allow us to reach our goals. It's going to be multiple pressure points.
Today, we talk about the potential for competition with Mission in the regional healthcare marketplace. We get into any role Dogwood Health Trust could play, along with the efficacy of independent monitoring. We also talk with Mayfield about her conversations with Mission board members who were responsible for approving the sale to HCA. And lastly, what do our guests believe needs to happen to make things right with Mission Hospital? Let's get back to Reclaim Healthcare. Who is part of this coalition? Give me a sense of the people and industries involved.
Yeah, and let me actually go back to another question that you asked, which was where did we come from? And it's all related. So this past fall, there were a number of things that happened. We started reading and hearing a lot about the diminishment of oncology services. Things in the ER were just getting disastrous. And the Attorney General started paying attention. He sent out some letters demanding information from HCA. We had physicians from Missy Cancer Center saying, we're not sending some class of our patients to Mission anymore. So things were starting to build, the momentum. And that's really when we came together. That's when I made that phone call to Bruce and said, look, 5 years ago, we had an impactful statement by elected officials about what was happening. This year, I think the most impactful statement that we can make would be one from physicians. And Bruce might regret that he picked up that phone, but he worked with a handful of physicians to draft a letter that he can talk more about. But that was a letter that, again, was presented to the independent monitor at their meeting in October about just the vast diminishment and degradation of not only the quality of care, but the quality of our healthcare community in our region. And that was the letter, that was the catalyst for the group that has come together since. And we can talk more about that, but Bruce, I don't know if you want to
let's
talk
a little bit about the letter. And now I know since the initial drafting, you've had more signatories on it. What was the general gist of this letter? And what did you hope to achieve by sending it to the independent monitor?
I think, as I said, I had a lot of catching up to do last fall. And I think over, a week or 10 days, I must have talked to several dozen of my former colleagues who had been in the community through the sale. And I was just frankly stunned at what I was hearing. It took me a while to believe it, but eventually I did. And as we have used the word degradation of this collegial and collaborative physician-led community that we had all been a part of for decades, and it was just gone within years. They had erased our institutional memory, and so fortunately was able to get 40 physician signatures for that letter within 2 weeks that we read to the independent monitor. And we spoke to the concerns that we had, both about quality of care, but about the loss of the culture that really was the underpinning of what we were able to build. Because what HCA has brought is completely antithetical to the culture that really allows physicians to be the best that they can be. And it was just very clear that that was gone. Yeah. And so we felt a need to speak to that, and since then have continued to reach out, and we're up to, as of yesterday, 254 signatures. About 30 of those are anonymous because of this intimidation and fear of retribution that is so widespread in the community. I mean, physicians are just many strong-minded, strong-willed physicians are afraid to speak out for fear of the harms that HCA could bring either to their programs or to their staff or to initiatives that they're supporting to try to improve care. And it's just, Missy used the word unconscionable, and it is. It's unconscionable, it's unethical, and it just flies in the face of everything that the best in healthcare should represent.
So obviously, this letter from doctors was the rocket fuel, I guess, initially to launch this. Who else is represented in this consortium?
After Bruce and after that initial group of physicians came together, my next phone call was to Missy. So Missy and I had connected a little over a year ago. I think it was last May. It was right about the time you were leaving. That's right. And we did not know each other, but we got connected, and we spent probably an hour on the phone one day as I was driving home from Raleigh, where she was pouring all of this out to me. And at the time, I didn't have anywhere for that to go. But working with these physicians and getting the commitment that we are going to build something, I reached back out to Missy and I said, I now have a place for your energy and your anger and your passion to go. And she immediately jumped in. And that then led to us reaching out to organizations that are already working on this issue. So the Health Equity Coalition is one. That group actually came together during the sale of the hospital to advocate against the sale of the hospital. Search up in Mitchell and Yancey counties, which came together when labor and delivery services were eliminated at Blue Ridge Hospital, and that was under old mission, so HCA doesn't get dinged with that. That organization came together, and then it really was just word of mouth of people who brought different perspectives. So we have nurses, we have clergy, we have other elected officials. Mayor Maureen Kopoloff in Brevard has been very outspoken about this. Mayor Patrick Taylor in Highlands, even though his hospital is a well-functioning hospital and his constituents are happy with that hospital, many of his constituents end up coming here to this hospital, and he is well aware of the problems and is very concerned about those. So we just kept expanding out.
I want to just briefly run down what I've seen as your bullet point goals of Reclaim Healthcare. Replace HCA with a nonprofit hospital system. That seems like a huge ask. Okay, number one. Hold HCA accountable for harmful culture and practices. Doctor, you were talking about the culture. That seems so subjective. How can you hold somebody accountable for a culture? That can bubble up from within. That doesn't necessarily come from top down. That can be from the bottom up. The last, restore best-in-class healthcare throughout the mission system. Laudable goal. Everybody would like to see that. What do you think you can do as a coalition that hasn't happened yet to make any of these things happen?
Oh, I think there's a lot. If you really look at it, the only things that have happened to push HCA to do anything differently have been the Attorney General's lawsuit last December, the findings of immediate jeopardy and EMTALA violations and other instances of substandard care by CMS earlier this year, and then most recently a finding by the Dogwood Health Trust independent monitor that they have violated some terms of the asset purchase agreement. There hasn't been any kind of coordinated effort to hold their feet to the fire. And our coalition is working on a number of levels to bring that pressure to bear. The way that we think about it is there is not one thing that is going to allow us to reach our goals. It's going to be multiple pressure points. I come out of the environmental world, and what we say is that there's no silver bullet for climate change. There's silver buckshot. And I think about that. I use that analogy in this case as well. There are already multiple pressure points on HCA, and we are going to be creating more. We are creating more.
Yeah. What I understand, and tell me if my memory is off on this, but that Mission is the second most profitable hospital in the HCA chain. They could look at all this pressure and say, the cynical view of this. They could say, look, we bought this. We're giving good health care. We've got these high scores, regardless of what you, doctor, have pointed out as the serious flaws in this system. But we've got these high scores. We're giving great care, and this deal is done. And they're not going to say we're making money hand over fist, but what's their incentive to surrender this hospital back into a nonprofit system?
They don't have it quite enough yet, but we think they will. There will be a point, and we don't know where that is. That decision is only going to get made in their C-suite, but there will be a point where the combination of these pressure points will, and a lot of it has to be financial. We're not naive about that. We're not going to win this fight by writing letters. That's not what's going to happen. But there will be a point where the public pressure, the media pressure, the legal pressure, the regulatory pressure, the legislative pressure, the financial pressure will come together, and I am convinced that they will leave.
One of the things that comes up occasionally, I see that there's a proposal to have more hospital beds in the region, and there's bids that different hospitals put in to have more beds, 67 more beds here, 23 more beds there. And Mission isn't winning those, that there are other hospitals that are being able to add beds, and Mission has fought that. That to me, again, tell me if I'm naive in this, is there any competitor that could come in and offer an alternative to Mission that would steer people to seek their healthcare out through their system in this region and force their hand that way? Or is Mission just such a huge monolithic force that no matter whether, 63 more beds here, 27 more beds here, that doesn't matter to us? Can competition, doctor, make a tangible difference in this region?
Yeah, I think without a question. And that's what you're seeing. Advent has their beds up in the northern part of the county. Novant has come in with applications for beds. Novant has been very present here for the past year, maybe two, trying to fill gaps that have just developed because of what HCA has done. So I think without question, competition will help, because right now, HCA, they're the only game in town. But we do know, and we hear these stories all the time, more and more people are going to Advent or to Pardee. If people have choices about going to other medical centers that are hours away for elective care, they're doing so. And so competition, without question, is one of those levers that we are grateful to see. You asked earlier about the culture and just what role that plays. But right now, there is a corporate-driven culture that goes by a playbook that HCA uses to maximize their profits to the benefit of their shareholders and their executives, in contrast to this collaborative, collegial, physician and nurse-led culture that was all pulling together to provide the very best care possible for everybody in the Western region. And that is what we had for decades, and that is now gone, and we want that back.
Right.
We also want back the trust and the pride that we had in Mission, because it's gone. And it's not going to be easy to build that back, but we are determined to do everything we can to make that happen.
You mentioned Novant and Advent, and I'm curious, have you had conversations as a collective, or are you going to, with either or both of them about becoming part of what your mission is with Reclaim Healthcare to try to pool their resources and their ability to increase competition Is there anything there? Are they aligned with your mission? Are they allies of what you're trying to do? Or because of who they are, do they have to keep a distance and run their businesses the way they're running them? And if they can compete, great, but they don't want to get involved in this larger effort. Where does that stand?
We're certainly having conversations with everyone, and that would include those two nonprofit systems. But I think we're all on parallel paths with kind of a central meeting point, wherever that may be. And we don't know what that's going to look like, but we all want safety, quality, a collaborative culture, and restore the trust that we had in what healthcare can be delivered at mission.
More after this. Hey everyone, Matt Peiken here from The Overlook, and I'll get back to my conversation in just a moment. But I'm asking you, the listener, yes, you listening this very moment, is The Overlook making a difference in your connection to Asheville? Do you know more about what makes this city tick and where we're struggling? If you had to give up 1 cup of coffee every month to do your part to keep this show going, would you step up? If you answered yes to any of that, and I really hope you did, please join dozens of other listeners by supporting The Overlook with Matt Peiken through my Patreon campaign by giving just $5 a month. Give it higher levels and you'll earn free tickets to my live podcasting events. Your support means the world to me and helps keep this show free for anyone to hear. Go to patreon.com/The Overlook Podcast. You mentioned the independent monitor that Dogwood Health Trust has appointed as part of the agreement with the sale. Is there any teeth to this monitor? What are they monitoring? And if they have to report to Dogwood, which was created because of the sale, is there a general conflict of interest there just by the very nature of how this, quote, independent monitor was appointed, or no? Is there a real substantive independent monitoring happening? And if so, what are they looking at?
Yeah, I think there is a real independence there. There was a little norming at the beginning of Dogwood Health Trust. Some members of the mission board were put on the Dogwood Health Trust board. That concerned a lot of people that there wouldn't be any kind of independence. But we're not in that place anymore, and the Dogwood Health Trust board is made up of great folks from all around the region, and these are not folks who were on the board and were connected to the mission board when the sale happened. There are people like Jack Cecil, I would say, who personally and his family have deep roots with Mission Hospital, but not involved around this sale. So I do think Dogwood is an independent organization. Yes, they're funded with the proceeds of the sale, but that's what has to happen when a for-profit buys a nonprofit. The value of the nonprofit has to be used for nonprofit purposes. So that's nothing nefarious there.
And I just want to put some context. Dogwood is far and away the most resourced nonprofit in this region now. Far and away, there's more money with Dogwood than any other nonprofit here. I just wanted to give that context.
And I think it's even bigger than that. I believe they actually, per capita, might be the most well-resourced foundation in the entire state because of the geographic limitations on where they can spend their money. So we have an incredible jewel in Dogwood Health Trust in terms of the resources that it can provide this region, and that it is providing this region. So the foundation and the funding part is most of what Dogwood does, but they do have this obligation under the asset purchase agreement to monitor HCA's compliance with the asset purchase agreement. And there are real things there. As we mentioned earlier, the asset purchase agreement requires certain services to be provided at the various hospitals for certain periods of time. And that requires monitoring. And for instance, that last December, that's when Josh Stein stepped in and said, you are no longer providing sufficient ER and oncology care to comply with the asset purchase agreement. And just this week, or last week, I guess, Dogwood Health Trust, their board came out and said the same thing. We find they have to say potential violations because that's the language in the agreement. But essentially, they have said, we agree that HCA breached the agreement last year in terms of providing these services.
And that was a first. We have not.
It was a first.
That was a first. So what are
that was huge, absolutely huge.
What are the potential consequences of Dogwood saying that? That seems to be pretty big, I would think. But are there ultimately any consequences if HCA's board just decides to shut the curtains?
So this gets back to that agreement, the asset purchase agreement, and how incredibly lopsided it is, and how Mission's staff, lawyers, and board allowed this agreement to get approved. I have no idea. It is so one-sided. Normally in an agreement like this, for failure to comply with the agreement, you would have penalties. You might have fines. You might have what are called liquidated damages, which is these are damages that begin to accrue when there's a violation of the agreement, and you don't have to go to court to get them. They just happen. There would also be metrics about quality of care, standards of care, levels of staffing. There's dozens of things that you could have chosen, they could have chosen, and they didn't choose any of them. So I think it just gets back to the point that this was very much an HCA-driven agreement, and the remedy that Dogwood Health Trust has, if they find a breach of the agreement, is to try to bring HCA into compliance through conversations and possibly litigation. If they cannot get to a place of agreement, then Dogwood has the option to file suit against HCA in the same way that the Attorney General did last year.
And what's happening with that lawsuit that Josh Stein filed?
So my understanding is that lawsuit is proceeding. They are in discovery, which is they're sharing a lot of documents back and forth, and that lawsuit will work itself out.
In years. It will take years.
It could take years. It could take months. Likely HCA will file a motion to dismiss or a motion for summary judgment, which asks the judge to make a finding that regardless of, even assuming everything in the pleadings is true, that they still haven't violated the agreement. So a judge will have an opportunity in a matter of months. It could be 6, 8, 10, 12 months. But over the course of the next year, we will hear from a judge that will give us some sense of the judge's interpretation of the agreement.
Julie, you've been in this community a while. You probably, tell me if I'm wrong on this, do you personally know any of the Mission board members? Anybody, you're nodding yes, that you know some of the people who were responsible for this sale. Have you had off-the-record conversations with any of them? And if so, can you give us a sense of what those conversations have been like?
I have had conversations with some of those folks, and here's what I'll say. There is a thirst on the part of our community for those board members to renounce, repent, disavow the decision that they made. My view is it is pointless to ask for that because we are not going to get it. That was a group of people who made a decision based on the information in front of them, and they made it. It was done. It's a done deal. We are where we are. It doesn't serve anybody. It doesn't serve anybody for those folks to come forward and say, we made a mistake.
It does. That's wrong. I don't believe that's pointless.
But it doesn't, again, it might make people in this community feel better, and I acknowledge that's important. From my perspective, it doesn't move the ball forward in terms of fixing the care at the hospital, in terms of getting HCA out the door. It doesn't move the ball forward that I'm trying to move forward. But here's where I think that group of people can be very helpful, and this is what I have said to them. They are a unique group of people in our community. They did make this decision. They were in direct conversations with HCA leadership for months about this. And I think the value that they can bring right now is to acknowledge, as some of them have publicly, that things have not worked out the way that they expected, that there has been damage to the healthcare community in our region, to the hospital, to quality of care. And if I could wish one thing, it would be for them to go to the HCA leadership and say, this has not played out the way that we all thought, and we need you to do better.
It's also important to say that the board were not alone in buying what Ron Paulus was promoting. There were a lot of good people, including many physician leaders, who also thought that this was the right thing to do, not just in our community, but in some of the surrounding communities. And many of them have said this very thing, that they were sold a bill of goods. They believed what Ron Paulus was telling them. And so even though the board is who made the decision, they were not the only ones who agreed that this was the right thing to do.
That's important context because I was just going to ask you, Julie, whether what you were hearing from the board members you think was honest, like we didn't know. I was just going to ask your interpretation of that.
Absolutely. I think they were told exactly what we were told, which is that there will be economic efficiencies and that things will not really change at the hospital. And I don't think any of them could have envisioned what has happened to our hospital. I think if any of them had an inkling of it or any sense that this is where we were going, I would like to think that as leaders in our community that they would not have made this decision.
Missy, are you still in touch with your colleagues there and former colleagues? And what's your sense of the tenor of working there and inside? Is there any protestation happening from inside? The pressure that you're putting on through Reclaim Healthcare, is there a pressure campaign happening from inside?
Yes, there is. I am still in touch with not just my colleagues on the Chaplain staff, but across the hospital, physicians, nurses, other support staff. And what we're hearing regularly is that the stories that came out in this report earlier in the year, situations and experiences are continuing to occur within the hospital system for staff and for patients that are reflective of this major report that we received earlier this year. In fact, when we launched Reclaim Healthcare WNC, Mission's PR person responded, they're just resharing old information. And on the surface, it may look like that's what we're doing, but underneath that, what is compelling us to continue to raise our voices and to continue to pull people into this conversation is the fact that we are still hearing stories day after day that reflect the kinds of circumstances that HCA was cited for by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And there are a couple of things that I just want to make sure that we include in this. One goes back to the conversation around other healthcare systems and whether they are able to purchase Mission should that opportunity arise. And you all can correct me if this isn't an accurate statement, but I understand what we're doing with Reclaim Healthcare WNC, that it reaches beyond what we're asking of HCA, that they either leave the community or that we hold them accountable in some way, that we see ourselves as the eyes and ears of this wider community, that no matter who ends up owning Mission Health System, that there is a community effort and group coming together to keep eyes and ears open to what's happening, because no matter who owns the system, we are going to be holding them accountable to quality patient care metrics. And we're going to be continuing to collect and encourage people to report to the regulatory agencies those stories that are counter to that. Did you want to add anything to that?
You're spot on. Nobody gets a pass just because they're a nonprofit system.
Yeah.
Whoever buys this system will know that they are coming into the community of Asheville, which has very strong feelings about lots of things, including this.
Yeah. Is there anything we haven't talked about or talked about enough where we short-skirted because we got onto another subject? Do you think it's important to give more detail about or context?
We just want to be very clear, as we have all along, just how much respect and admiration and gratitude we have for the staff that are working there, showing up every day and doing their best. We're just so grateful for them. And we hope that everyone who listens to this or reads about it, when they go into that hospital, they express their thanks to whoever is taking care of them for doing the best that they can with the resources that are available, and that there are still pockets of excellent care at Mission thanks to the dedication of the staff who are showing up every single day doing their very best.
Missy, you want to close?
Yeah, I have one last thing that I want to add, and it goes back to a question you asked earlier. What makes y'all think you're going to succeed at this? Because it is a daunting task. HCA is this huge corporation with lots of resources. And I am asked that question, yeah, it seems impossible, but any social or cultural change in this world is often against huge odds. And any culture or social change that happens because people band together, raise their voices, and demand something better. A friend of many in this community, David Lamott, just released his TEDx talk that was an editor's pick, and in that he speaks to this idea of a hero narrative versus a movement narrative. And when I listened to his TEDx talk, I was so encouraged because my experience in working with this group of people, this is not a hero narrative. There's not one of us that's flying in and suddenly making everything's better and then sailing away. This is a true community movement that is trying and working to build a broad base of support to bring the people of this entire region together, because this is impacting not just folks here in Asheville, but all of Western North Carolina. And it's going to take all of us coming to the table, raising our voices, sharing our stories, and using all of that energy and social capital to move the needle in this, whether it's getting HCA out of Western North Carolina or continuing to hold them accountable in whatever ways that we can with the power of community. And I am deeply encouraged by that, because that's exactly what is happening within this coalition.
I want to thank my guests today, the founders of Reclaim Healthcare WNC, State Senator Julie Mayfield, retired physician Bruce Kelly, and Missy Harris, a former chaplain with Mission Hospital. Our conversation took place at the BB Theater in downtown Asheville, which comes to me courtesy of Asheville Contemporary Dance Theater and owners Susan and Giles Collard. If you value the Overlook's place in Asheville's media landscape, please consider joining dozens of others who are supporting the show through my Patreon crowdfunding page. Become a member for as little as $5 a month. Visit patreon.com/The Overlook Podcast. Our First Look newsletter gives you just a handful of daily headlines from around the local media landscape to get you on your morning. We also have a weekly newsletter devoted to all things The Overlook that hits you every Friday. Both are free and available at podavl.com/newsletter. The theme song for The Overlook, Maker's Song, comes to us courtesy of the Asheville duo The Resonant Rogues. The Overlook is a production of Podcast Asheville. New episodes come out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on any social media channel at AVL Overlook. And I'll see you on the next episode of The Overlook with Matt Peiken.